make a recipe that has been around on my website for a long time. It's one of the first recipes that I posted, a first sourdough recipe. And the reason that I thought it up and created it is because my mom loved to buy this nutty cranberry bread from the grocery store. And I thought I can make a better sourdough version of that. I love pecans. I love the dried craisins or cranberries, and I could put those into a delicious, delicious loaf. This has become one of my favorites. I love the little tartness from the dried cranberries, and I love the nuttiness from the pecans. You could sub walnuts if you preferred walnuts, or any nut that you really love. You could even sub raisins if you'd rather have raisins, or something like that for the cranberries. But I think you're gonna love this. It is my cranberry pecan sourdough loaf. Let's get going. We're gonna start out with our ripe active levain. I put it right into my bowler. I'm using a container today. And we're doing 100 grams of this. And then we're gonna add our water and our flour. And this is a process that I like to call it fermentolise. So basically you're taking this ferment part, which is the starter. If I have a little extra, a little over, under, it's okay. But you're taking the starter, you're taking the water, most of the water. We're not doing quite all of it. We're gonna add a little bit in later, and you're taking the flour. You're gonna mix those together and let it sit for about 30 minutes. You do want to use a warmer water because my kitchen is cold right now. If it was summertime, I'd want to use a cooler water, so it just kind of depends on your conditions. I like to kind of mix this up with my hands, and then I'm gonna add in my flour. And I do a combination of a bread flour and a little bit of whole wheat in here as well. If you don't have any whole wheat, you can just use all bread flour. The whole wheat speeds it up just a little bit, but if you don't have it, bread flour, all bread flour works too. Now this process of basically delaying adding the salt, it just makes the gluten strands a little bit more elastic. Basically what happens, salt inhibits the gluten forming and fermentation. So by doing like a little bit of a 30-minute fermentolise, it allows the dough to get a little bit of a head start, being really elastic and stretchy, just because the water and flour are combined. So that's what happens when flour and water combine. They start to form gluten strands. Anyway, so I'm just mixing these up together, and then I'm gonna put the lid on and let it sit for about 30 minutes. You do wanna watch your temperature. Make sure that your dough is right around 78 degrees Fahrenheit. That is where the wild yeast and bacteria work the best. About anywhere 76 to 80 degrees. So we're gonna cover this and let it sit. We'll come back to it in about half an hour to add the salt and the extra water. I just stuck the thermometer in my dough. It's about 80, so that just tells me that this may go a little bit faster, my fermentation timeline. So I just want to be watching for the dough to be ready to shape a little bit earlier than if it was a cooler temperature. Because my dough is relatively warm right now, I don't need to use my bread proofer or my dough mat, but if the dough cools down at all, I would put it in here to just keep that temperature. So these are the items that I like to use the most. They've really improved my bread game. But if you're in a warmer day, or I'm actually more in like the middle of the day, so it's warmed up a bit than this morning, I don't need to use them. I'm just pouring my salt out here. So I like to set aside the salt in a little container, and then my extra water, I like to put that in a little container as well. And then after about 30 minutes, I can just add them really easily into the dough. So I set those aside. Sometimes I'll even put them on top of the container so that I don't forget to add the salt and the extra water. All right, it's been 30 minutes. I'm gonna add in my salt and a little bit of extra water, and that helps the salt to just incorporate into the dough. So I put it right on top, and then I take my fingers and I just kind of pinch it together. Now you can use a container to do this, which I have here, or you could do this in a bowl. It's actually a little bit easier in a bowl, but I do love these containers, especially if you're making, I'm only making 1 loaf here today, but if I was making 2, 3 loaves, then these containers are great for that. Or you can do this part in a bowl and then put the dough in the container when you're done. Basically, you're just now incorporating all of the salt and the water in this dough. And this is also the time you want to do a little bit of strengthening. So to do that, some people use a slap and fold method. I prefer to just kind of pick the dough up and throw it, but still holding on against the side of my bowl or container, as the case may be. This extra little bit of strengthening really helps give your dough a little bit of structure and forms, just like you get a little bit of a higher spring and all of that in your dough, and it kind of comes together a little bit better. You can see how this dough has started to come together. You can do this anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes, and it's helpful. It's also helpful to get your hand wet. Use a damp hand when you're doing this. Makes it easier to work with the dough. If it starts to stick, which this is a sticky dough, but take your hand, get it a little bit wet, makes it a little bit easier to work with the dough. Okay, you're gonna have this beautiful dough that's all come together. We're gonna let it sit for another 30 minutes. I'm gonna check the temperature now, and it is right at about 78, which is exactly what I want. Check it in 30 minutes. Okay, we're on our first set of stretch and folds here. So you can see how the dough has relaxed out. I like to wet my hand again. And to stretch and fold, this works really well in a bowl. You just stretch the dough and fold it over. Stretch it and fold it over, and stretch it and fold it over. In these kinds of rectangular containers, I actually prefer to do a coil fold, and I'll show you that on the next batch of folds. You can do either coil folds or stretch and folds. The goal is to get all of the dough to just continue and to stay like in one ball there that's strengthening those gluten strands very gently. On the next set of folds, I'll show you a coil fold, but I will also be adding in my inclusions. Okay, we're on our second set of folds, and it is time to add in our pecans and craisins. I do chopped pecans and craisins, and we just sprinkle them on top of the dough like this. You can now either stretch and fold them in or use a coil fold to get them incorporated into the dough. Make sure that you wet your hands a little bit. You come on up and do a few coil folds this way. Just add the craisins back on top as needed. I don't soak the craisins. They will end up getting a little moisture from the dough. This is a little bit of a wetter dough, and so that's okay. We're gonna let the dough spread back out again, and then we'll do another set of folds a little bit later. It's been 30 minutes. We're gonna do one more set of folds here. This may need another one, usually 3 to 4 sets. I'm just coming in here and I'm gonna do a few more coil folds. Let those craisins really get worked in here. You can see how well developed this dough is. So I don't know that it is actually going to need another set of folds like this, just because of how well developed the dough is. But you could add one more if you wanted to. We're gonna let that sit here for probably another 1.5 to 2 hours. Kind of will depend on the temperature. I wanna see it grow. Right now it's at 75, so it may take closer to 2.5 hours. And we will check it then and see what it's looking like. Look at how much it's spread out, risen. You can kind of see a little doming here in the middle. You'd be able to see this more if it was in a actual bowl instead of this container. But this is what you want to look for, is about a 40% rise. I'm going to dump out this dough. Go ahead and shape it up. As I was working with this dough, it felt like it
didn't need the pre-shaping step, and I could tell because I felt like it had risen maybe a little bit over and was a little bit warm, and so I skipped the pre-shaping in this. But if I pre-shaped it, I would have stopped right there, let it rest on the counter for about 30 minutes, and then gone ahead and shaped the dough as I just did. Instead, I just moved it straight into the basket.
We keep turning this around, and then we're gonna stick it right into our banneton. Now I like to use this banneton lined with a hairnet, and then we're gonna stick it right into the banneton. I like to go around if I can. Sometimes you have to let this rest for a minute and just tighten it up a little bit, stitching it up right like this to help it, keeping it to come together a little. But we're gonna cover this and stick it in the fridge overnight. Okay, it's the next morning. Here is my cranberry pecan loaf. It's been resting in the fridge. I'm gonna dump it out onto my parchment paper, and then I'm gonna score it. I like to do a really simple score on loaves with inclusions, and I usually do something like this on a round loaf, so keep it simple. You can actually go in a little bit if you're trying to get these and lift this part up here, and then I'll take my bread loam and just kind of cut right into there just to make this go up a little bit more if we want a little more definition in the score. But typically these cranberries, pecans, they're going to be the main focus of this loaf, so you don't need a lot of extra intricate scoring. So now this is scored, I'm going to go stick it in my oven. I've been preheating my oven here 500 degrees, and I've got my Dutch oven in here. I'm going to add the dough right into my hot Dutch oven, put the lid back on top, and I'm gonna reduce the temperature up here to 450 degrees. We're gonna bake it about 25 minutes and then come and take the lid off. 25 minutes are up. Look how pretty that loaf is. It's risen beautifully. I'm gonna let it now bake with the lid off for about 20 minutes. Look how beautiful this loaf is. Cranberry pecan. Oh, it's nice and crispy on the outside. Can't wait to slice this up, but we're gonna let it cool completely first. In about maybe 5 minutes, I'll remove it to a cooling rack so the bottom doesn't get soggy, but it looks great. Sliced it open. It smells so good. This is honestly one of my favorites. The color is so pretty too. If you haven't made it yet, or if I've inspired you to make it, go make it, enjoy it, give it to friends and family. It's actually one of the loaves that I used to make when I would teach my in-person classes. I'd always have like bread. Here you go, look at that. Oh. I would always have bread that I would bring and let people, snack on while I was teaching the class, because you have to have good bread in a class that you're sitting through. This was one of the loaves that I make, and it was a crowd pleaser every time. Oh. Yes, the crunch, the soft interior, cranberry pecan. You're gonna love this one.